Hey there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, it's DMG and welcome back to Blitz, and today I thought I'd try my hand at a tank review this time, the first in a long time actually, on a tank that was recently buffed. This is the Tier 10 German medium tank, the E50M. Now before I get too much into this review, I just want to say that this is also kind of like a little competition. I hope you guys comment on which replay you think is the best out of all of them. I know that this replay right here is from Flying By from the EU server, who happens to be from Germany driving a German tank. So if there's any national pride going on there, and if that's any reason to give him the vote, then do so. I do think it is also a good replay, but you also see Majime, or Majimi, from my clan, my Officer Majora, playing in the E50M as well, and she is known for driving that tank specifically after being a Russian bias IS-7 driver, then converted into, or now converted into, a German finesse machine. And then the last replay I have is of myself playing. So please, there's a little bit of a competition going on between Majime and I about who drives the E50M better, and I'd really like to hear your thoughts on which replay you think is best. Anyway, this is the tank review of the E50M. I'm going to try and do it in a little bit different format this time. Like I said before in previous reviews, I'm trying to keep the style of not throwing a bunch of tank stats up on the screen. No one really wants to see that, in my opinion, and honestly, if you're really that interested, you can just go look that up yourself on BlitzStars. You know, seeing publicly information copy pasted to you again, I don't find very helpful in most tank reviews. However, I will throw in a few tank stats here and there just to help you kind of understand the ins and outs of this tank and how you should play it to achieve success. I think something that is kind of important to mention here is that the E50M, this most recent patch, has been buffed in terms of its DPM skyrocketing from almost 2,900 to almost 3,200, and then its gun depression increasing by 33% from 6 to 8 degrees. Now what this allows the E50M to do is return to almost a pre-nerf state. Now what I mean by pre-nerf is that before mediums got nerfed all across the board, they had 330 heat penetration, and the E50M normally had penetration, like I said, with 330, but also had a 7.1 second reload. And these buffs allow you to have the E50M running calibrated shells with 330 millimeters of heat penetration, a little bit less, about 11 exactly millimeters of penetration less on your standard, but 257 is more than enough. You also get a little bit more gun depression, 33% to be exact. That's actually more than a little, which is very, very nice. But you also get better aim time, which is something that the E50M pre-nerf did struggle with. So I would say compared to the pre-3.6 or pre-update 3.6 E50M, if you can remember back that far, I think you're getting a better package overall, despite the small penetration loss on your standard rounds. You get your great heat rounds back, you get a better gun, you get more gun depression to use your armor effectively. Now the E50M now does have pretty good DPM. It's no longer sluggish. It's better than the WZ121 with about 200 more, and is only 8 DPM behind the patent, so it's 3,196 compared to 3,204. And even though your DPM is significantly less than, say, your Leopard 1 or your T62A or your Object 140, you trade that for a little bit more alpha. So in the sense of that, the T62A has to fire every 5.2 seconds to maximize out its DPM. The E50M has to fire every 6.5 seconds-ish, or in the calibrated shells, if you decide to run that, 7.1 seconds to pump out its DPM. So if the T62A does not have the opportunity to make a shot every 5.2 seconds, it's not that great in terms of DPM. Or I wouldn't say it's not that great, but the E50M would be the better choice. Now, in terms of armor, I really think this is where the E50M shines compared to, say, the T62A or the STB-1 or the Leopard 1. Looking at a bunch of other mediums now that have decently accurate guns to very accurate guns, right? Now, the E50M has this amazingly sloped frontal plate, and you're going to see that here in this replay with Majim on Castilla. And while it's not the thickest upper plate, you will bounce shells from standard rounds from T62As, Object 140s, and even some premium rounds flat on, and especially when you're angled. Now, of course, your armor angle will be decreased if they are firing down at you, as it is sloped, but if you can keep them on relatively even ground or flat ground with you, your armor profile is absolutely fantastic. And with 8 degrees of gun depression, you can poke this armor profile a little bit more over the front of ridge lines and really abuse the armor profile of the tank. Now, that's not to say that the armor profile is all that special. It does have some weak points that I do want to point out. First of all, I do think if this tank would be buffed again, they would increase the side armor. Right now, it is about the side armor level of a Tiger II. That's not great. Now, the Tiger II can frequently get penned by lots of Tier 7 and Tier 8 guns in the side with relative ease, and that's pretty much the same deal for the E50M. But the E50M is a medium tank. It can use its armor profile a little bit better because it will be fighting medium tanks more often than heavy tanks. But the point is that its side armor is a little weak, and I don't really know how that Type 62 gets that shot across, as it was using the 90mm stock gun that is the top gun on the STA-1. The E50M, on the other hand, has this 105 cannon on a good armored platform. But like I said, it's not invincible. As you see, the Type 61 did pen as he was aiming down with that stock 90mm on the E50M, being able to pen. But once the Type 62 is on flat ground, he will not pen again. Now, the important thing to recognize here is that Majim is playing against a lower tier tank, so it may not be the most indicative or the best example, or putting it in the toughest situation against a stock Type 61 TOC. Geez, trying to combine words there. But you can see how the armor profile works. Now, another weak point that I do think is more noticeable, but I would definitely not change whatsoever, is the turret. Now, you're thinking, well, the turret's pretty strong. I would say not exactly. Tier for tier, the T62A just does it better overall. Now, the T62A has that spherical dome UFO-like turret, while the E50M has these flat, kind of angular plates on the sides, and it's not that strong. Sure, the raw turret thickness is strong, but it's not going to buy you much when T62As and Object 140s start slinging heat at you. Even heavy tanks that are able to get their gun at your turret will be able to pen you with gold fairly reliably. The E50M's turret is not all that spectacular when you put it against gold rounds. And yes, even though they do less damage, there are people who are, myself included, who are, if they have to use them against a haul-down E50M, they will. And at Tier 9 and 10, I would expect everybody to carry gold rounds just to be on the safe side. And as I said before, back to the good armor profile of this E50M, the M4A6 Patton does not really stand a chance in a face-hug brawl. And that's where the E50M is so great. Now, in the DPM versus armor department, the E50M does not have the greatest, unlike the Leopard. However, if you can make, let's say, the Leopard bounce a shot or two, or the T62A bounce 2 shots, they suddenly have less DPM than you, but you still maintain a better armor profile, which means that in any one-on-one engagement, if you can bounce at least 2 shots from any same tier medium, you will almost assuredly win the battle in a burn them down fight in a 1v1 scenario. That's a mistake there that I just want to point out right there for Majimi. You're not really supposed to be firing heat at the sides of the IS-7, especially when, not the IS-7, but the IS-4, as heat will not go through the tracks. Definitely would have gone for APCR there. IS-4 should have been dead about 10 seconds ago, so we're going to see just how long this will actually take Majimi to rectify this mistake and come out of this situation with a victory, if that even happens. The Leopard PTA goes down, and now Majimi is in a 1v3. But as you can see right there, the armor profile really holding up well. An angled upper front plate right there is doing wonders for Majimi, allowing her to bounce shots against the Chieftain Mark VI and the grill. Good stuff there. Mobility is quite an odd aspect for this tank. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's not the worst, right? It's not leopard fast, but what is, right, other than the bat jet? But then you're talking about a light tank. Now, if you want to compare it to something, maybe I'd compare it to the M48 or the M60, or maybe even the T62A. It's somewhere around there, right? Now, why I say this is kind of a quirky medium tank in terms of mobility is that it has good top speed, but not the greatest acceleration. But once it gets to its top speed, it does a good job maintaining its forward momentum, just because it is so heavily armored and it weighs so much more. It goes 60 kilometers an hour compared to the M48's 48, or the T62A's 50 kilometers an hour, or even the STB's 53 kilometers an hour. So you're going to be outpacing all three of those meta mediums in the long-term game. However, your acceleration is a little bit poor, say, compared to the STB, and your terrain resistances are poor enough to the point where you're just getting outclassed by the T62A and the M48, despite you having a better power-to-weight ratio than both of those. And your traverse isn't spectacular either for a medium tank. A medium will out-traverse most heavies, it will out-traverse most tank destroyers. But against, let's say, a T62A, which can run at about 56 degrees traverse stock, you're running at about 44 degrees traverse stock. So that's, what, over 25% more for the T62A? So in terms of mobility and just trying to get around, making sure that you're circling heavy as well, the T62A is clearly the better choice. But like I said, in a face hug brawl, you will be winning out against mediums and even some heavies. I'd also like to point out right now that this is my game on Desert Sands, and you will see a very seemingly almost clairvoyant kind of move by myself in this game. I do think it is worth watching all the way through, and I do hope I get your vote. Anyway, if I had to pick a phrase for how to play this tank well, despite not lagging, right, as you can see in the video, but if I had to pick a phrase on how to play this tank properly, I would say just learn your matchups. Learn what you do better than the other tank. Now, that sometimes may be hard if you just don't have enough game knowledge. Now, that's another important thing about the E50M that translates into. You need to have good game knowledge. Know what you do better than other tanks. Know other tank stats, right? And now, since the E50M has gotten buffed in its DPM and its gun depression categories, you just have a better all-around machine. But consider this against various types of tanks, right? Let's have E50M versus Object 140 or T62A, right? They have the DPM over you, but you have the armor profile over them. You have the gun depression over them. So what that means is you can probably go face hug them and bounce their shots and then burn them down if you can bounce enough shots. Because now, with the increased gun depression, it is much easier to shoot down on T62As. Now let's say E50M versus the E100. Well, you have accuracy and mobility over the E100, so play at range, use your heat rounds to your advantage, and just gold the E100's turret if it ever gets into a sticky situation. Of course, you also have those 257mm standard penetration APCR rounds should you decide to run calibrated shells, which are usually more than enough to penetrate any target once Wargaming fixes the dumb aiming system that they have implemented with this most recent update. That was a poke at Wargaming. Anyways, the E50M, let's say, versus the Object 268 or the Jagdpanzer 100 or the FB183. They don't have fully traversable turrets, so that's the time when you're more mobile, usually. I mean, Object 268 can be a little iffy, but in the case of the Jagdpanzer 100, I wouldn't play hull-down peekaboo war at long range, necessarily, or even mid-range with the Jagdpanzer 100, but I could use my mobility that I know that is better than the Jagdpanzer E100 and flank, get behind, and possibly start a circle of death. So keep in mind that while you may not do something as well as somebody else in the E50M, you will always be doing something better. And you just need to find what you do better than the other tank and then exploit that as much as possible. So in this case, let's say against this E5 right now, yes, he's not looking at me, but I have roughly the same DPM, a little bit more mobility, a little bit less armor profile. So that means I just need to be mobile against that E5 and, make sure I'm hitting all of my shots. Against that Waffle Tractor, I don't have the best penetration compared to the Waffle. I don't have the camouflage compared to the Waffle, but I know I can go and brawl him, put HE through him with my gun that is accurate at mid-range. And this Leopard right here, I don't have the DPM to deal with him. I don't necessarily have the mobility to keep up with him. But even though this Leopard made kind of a mistake by thinking that he can engage me 1v1, I am using the armor profile to exploit my strength, or just abuse my strength and really expose his weakness. And since that he bounced 2 shots, my DPM becomes higher than his. So as you can see there, it's just using the strength of your tank and exploiting the weaknesses of their tank really make the E50M a winner in my book. Now, this is my most played tank at tier 10, and I was a complete noob in this when I first started playing it. I actually started doing pretty well, but I have this terrible habit of playing tanks ad nauseum, almost to the point of physical exhaustion. So I'd play about 60-70 games in this tank, and I was doing really well for the first 50, and then I had to keep playing, and then my stats just died. But still, like I said, I was a complete noob, and I didn't really understand the idea of really abusing matchups. And as you can see there, I'm face-hugging the Waffle Tractor, knowing that he will have a tough time penning me unless he goes to gold and goes right through the turret. Now, is this the best tank? I would probably say no. Is it good right now? Yeah, probably. So, if you like that content, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you didn't, please leave your constructive criticism in the comment section. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion with you today, and I hope to see you next time.